Hey, how's it going, Trunk Slayers? There was some conversation the other day about measuring client operational maturity levels, or OML. And it occurred to me that I might be guilty of something that I had talked about earlier this week of assuming knowledge that I had was common knowledge. So I wanted to share some strategies around how you could start measuring your client's operational maturity level and use that in your business. So, for people who might not be familiar, operational maturity level, or OML, at least in our space, is really attributed to be a Paul Dipple thing. That's service leadership. I'm a big fan of service leadership, but we're not here to plug service leadership. You can go into really deep detail about how it works. I'm not going to do that here because I think you're all smart enough to look that up. But basically, you go in and you rank a number of areas of a business on a scale of 1 to 5. And a 1 means that whatever you're ranking doesn't exist. It just isn't there. A 2 means that it's being done ad hoc. A 3 means that it's undocumented, but it is being performed, or at least there's an attempt to perform it on a regular basis. A 4 means that it's partially documented and being consistently performed, or at least that's what you think. And a 5 means that it's completely and fully documented, fully executed, and there's a full accountability loop to prove the other two things. And it's the system of going in and ranking, and no one really would ever be at if you go through and aggregate and average that out for all the factors you're measuring, no business should really ever be a 0 or a 5. A 5 is kind of impossible because as you grow, your needs will change and you'll have to go back and reassess yourself because your OML will change as you grow and your needs change. And if you're at a 0, then you're not actually in business. You're not doing so it's very common then to measure your OML in fractional points. And most of the MSPs that we would think of in this space as being pretty well-run organizations are probably sitting somewhere in the high 3s, maybe the low 4s, just to give everybody here an idea. And that usually took a long time to get to that point. I think the average MSP that is just acceptably run is probably somewhere in the mid 2s, maybe even high 2s. So, given that we've introduced the concept of OML, we've kind of defined a little bit about that 1 to 5 ranking system. There are plenty of things you can go look at online that are designed for MSPs to rank themselves. Service leadership has a thing you can run through. How do you do it with your clients? And in fact, how do you do it with any entity that isn't your own internal entity? I've had coaches in the past that have gone in and done things where they've asked us to fill out an assessment sheet, and that can work. But how do you do that for your MSP clients? Because obviously your MSP clients, or if you're a vendor, your MSPs that are your clients, they're probably not going to fill out a business assessment sheet for you based on that style of relationship because you're not there to run their entire business. You're there to manage their technology. So you have to do a certain amount of observational and lowest common denominator question asking to get a reasonable insight and look for trends and patterns in any business that are reasonable indicators of how you might rank that operational maturity level. And then there's a few other factors that I like to throw in when I'm ranking clients that are good sanity checks or checks and balances against an OML score, given that I don't actually work at that business. So we would talk about that a little bit. The best way to do this, in my opinion, is to make an Excel sheet or something like an Excel sheet where you have all your clients, you have your categories you're ranking at the top. I would make sure, in addition to the client names, you're tracking the vertical that the client serves in case you find any particular trend here. And a lot of what I'm going to explain really focuses around that idea of using this style of reporting to predict what you are best at as an MSP. So the vertical the client serves. I would also capture the client's business entity type, S Corp, C Corp, sole proprietor, 501c, because you may end up finding out that the clients that you seem best equipped to support have a certain maturity level, are in a certain vertical, and have a certain business entity type. And those correlations are really helpful if you then go back to your sales team who's doing marketing, if you have any SDRs, BDRs out there, letting them know that information makes their life so much easier. And then it's much easier to target your materials around closing that kind of business. The very first non-OML factor that I would measure to double check the rest of everything else you're going to do in this report. Every MSP goes in and somehow we list in our tool set who the decision makers are, right? That's the primary contact, decision maker. That's the person that we're saying that the client is allowed to sign things, authorize things. I would have two columns, one column for the number of decision makers officially. And then I would go and I would poll in some method the service delivery team and see what their answer is. How many decision makers does your service team think there are? And if there's a value drift there, that's your first OML red flag that should let you know that any other rating you give the rest of this worksheet, there's probably a mismatch in your perception of the client and your actual company's perception of the client. And the company's perception, your team's perception is more important than yours for the sake of this, because they are the ones who are working with the client and having the most touch with the client. Two other things I would consider tracking along with this that I'm a huge fan of tracking for all clients. I would have a PETA factor column that I would measure like an OML 1 to 5, and I would have a jerk factor column. A client can be a pain in the ass and not be a jerk, and a client can be a jerk and not be a pain in the ass. And I'll give that example for an MSP. You could have a client that has low technical debt, always complies with your recommendations, but the primary contact or the ownership is just really rude and dismissive to you and your team. They're jerks, but they're not a pain in the butt to support. They're very compliant with being supported. You can flip that around. You can have the sweetest client in the world, and usually I find these to be in sole proprietorships. But you can have the sweetest client in the world, super nice, sends you guys gifts, bakes cookies for your team whenever they're on site, but they're a huge pain in the butt. Maybe they submit 500 password resets a month. They constantly miss QBRs. They don't approve anything. They want you to turn off MFA for certain people, but only on Tuesdays under a full moon. They're just a nightmare to support, but they're really nice. So it's important to track both PETA factor, jerk factor. I would track them both like an OML score 1 to 5. And then I would get into the actual ranking of the client. At a high level, you want to break down the major areas of any business and kind of rank them as best you can. So, you know, their finance process, their change order process, their hiring and termination process, all those different types of categories. But you're not necessarily going to have insight into all of them. So there's little things that you can kind of look for. One of the things I suggest, go in when you first start your relationship with a client, you should be doing this anyways, and rank like an OML 1 to 5 what their initial technical debt is. 5 being they have no technical debt, they are perfect. 1 being, I mean, server, 2003, RDS punched through the firewall open. I mean, just an absolute dumpster fire. On-prem POP3 hosted off of somebody's MacBook. I mean, that level of technical debt. Go through and rank that. And then you want to rank what their current technical debt is, assuming you're doing this assessment later, and look for a value drift and see how much their technical debt has changed since you first started working with them. Because if you're a good MSP, you're likely pushing in your QBR process. They need to improve these things. So over time, their ability to make those changes should start to be a reasonable factor of the client's overall ability to take their line of business seriously. There are going to be exceptions, so you can add another column there that where you're going in and you're ranking, once again, on that OML scale, how much their technical debt directly affects their line of business. Because I think that's a really important thing to understand. If you've got a client that has a physical location with an end-of-life edge appliance, but no one works there, and they only go to it once a month for an all-company, all-hands meeting, kind of doesn't matter to them that they have an end-of-life firewall. It may matter to you as the MSP, but that's not affecting their day-to-day line of business. It may be a huge risk. I'm not downplaying any of that. It may affect their ability to get cyber liability insurance. It could have a whole bunch of consequences, but from their ability to basically give a shit about it, it's probably pretty low. And that's a really important thing that you kind of have to go through. And it's that mindset as you're doing this for the client. How much do they appear to care about this thing? Some things you can look at. Were they willing to auto pay you? Or did they put a big fuss up about that? That's a maturity factor. Somebody who is initially able to say, yeah, I have no problem going on ACH or, auto from my credit card is a different financial maturity level than somebody who says, no, I need to cut you a check every time. Do they have an AR process? You could probably find that out by looking through their website, by looking at how they treat their own clients. And then look for subtle indications. Do they follow their AR process? Does this client already do budgeting? Are they asking you for a budget? Are they using words like budget? Are they saying that's not in our budget? That is in our budget. Or do they not even bring that word up at all? If you try to bring up the concept of budgeting during a QBR process, are they like, oh, cool, let's do that? Or teach me how to do that? Or are they hesitant? Are they saying, I don't want to do that? That's not valuable to me. Do they have change control processes that don't even have to necessarily be IT change control processes? Because we are trying to look at the total picture. If they have a physical office, walk around. You'll be able to tell if there's a change control process. Are there labels on things? Are there forms? Whatever it is that they do. Maybe if it's a large place with a lot of employees, in the bathroom, is there some indication of how often it gets cleaned, like a chart? Like, are they at any level, is the business indicating they have change control processes for anything? Are printers out of paper or toner? That's a really good one, because that's a super easy thing to automate. Super easy. You just auto ship new paper and toner. On the other hand, if you have a supply room full of paper and toner, but the printers are always empty, another thing to check. Do they have any sort of internal process, whether it's IT related or not, for hiring or firing an employee? Will they let you look at it? And how much of a hot mess express is it? And if you're not entirely sure, or if you're not comfortable asking that, just kind of pay attention and observe. You can tell a little bit if you look around and you see that like there's 10 different employees and they all have a slightly different formatted email. Probably there's no like define. That's probably like an OML like 2. They're doing it ad hoc. Do stuff that isn't MSP related at all, stuff you don't care about. Is it the same and is it consistent? So if, I don't know, they all have desks. Is it all the same kind of desk? And does it all look like it was purchased at the exact same time? So similar level of shabbiness? Or does it look like they've continued to purchase matching things as they go forward? You can balance this a little bit against the type of business they're in. I certainly don't expect a super blue collar business that doesn't really have a lot of office presence or clients visiting their office to care as much about the shabbiness of their office. But you can still look for consistency. In their technology stack, is all their equipment of a relatively similar time period, similar make and model and manufacturer? In other words, if 5 people have Lenovo's, do the remaining people all have some sort of Lenovo from, let's say, a 10-year gap? Yes or no? Things like that. Do they have an office map posted? If they don't and you ask them for one, can they provide it? Or they're like, I don't even know why I'd want that. And you kind of go through and look for those things. Look for indications that they have vendors that do other stuff. I'm a big fan when I onboard a client of asking for a list of all their vendors that might relate to anything electrical, because we're probably going to get blamed for it anyways. But take that a step further, kind of poke around. Like, as you're working with the client over the next, 6 months to a year, do you see the same landscaping company going there? Do they have a maintenance company posted, and like whatever their boiler or HVAC room is there like a maintenance company posted? Is there a log maintenance is being performed regularly? You can use these factors to start to really get a decent sense of sort of their general operational maturity. And you can reasonably then extrapolate from this your own chart of the things that you care about. And that'll all come together, and it'll really provide you with a way to then guide how you're going to work on that relationship going forward. So you've gone in, you've ranked your clients, OML, you're continuing to do it. What does this all mean? So what's the lesson, the TLDR? What I have found is that you should have a certain banding of your own MSP operational maturity. I would not really probably go more than one OML unit. So if you're currently at 2.2, I would say 2.2 to 3.2. You can take clients that are lower than your operational maturity. You can basically date beneath your standing, your social standing, so to speak. Like, you can do that. It'll aggravate you, but most of the time that'll work okay. You just won't like the client very much. Where you're gonna fail almost every single time is if you try to swing out of your weight class. If you try to bring on a client that's above your operational maturity, what's going to end up happening is they are going to be your most time intensive, your most expensive client to support, and you're constantly going to feel like you're playing catch up to them. Even if your technical ability is above theirs, you're still going to find that you're just constantly running behind them, and they're not going to really treat you like a valued, trusted partner. So that's just something to keep in mind. My mother always used to say that, you know, when you're going out into the world and you're dating, you want to date someone at your intelligence level, or maybe even a little smarter than you. I would say kind of the reverse applies here in an MSP. You really don't want to date a company whose maturity is that far beyond yours. You're not going to rise to the occasion, even though you're thinking, oh, I could get better and I'll grow to support them. No, you're just going to damage a relationship and take somebody who had nothing to say about your company and turn them into a net detractor. So that's that's why this tool is really helpful, because it allows you to figure out, even if every other factor says they're an ideal client, I'm probably not ever going to be able to turn this client into a net promoter. And at the end of the day, that is why you're in business and why you're doing this. Good luck, everybody.